Welcome to this bonus video where we're going to be discussing Venus in Gemini. So today's date is April 12, 2020, and Venus first moved into Gemini on April 3, and usually she'd be there for just 4 weeks, but this year she is trading her usual 4-week tour of Gemini for 4 months. So we're going to have Venus in Gemini from April 3 through till August 7. So that's an unusual long time for Venus to be in Gemini. And this is going to be perhaps a little bit more of a positive influence for our fellow air signs of Libra and Aquarius. Not as ideal for so Libra and Aquarius, great. And our fire signs too, it's going to be great for our Leos, our Aries, and of course, maybe to a lesser extent, the Sagittarius, because that forms the opposition to Gemini. The water signs of Cancer and Scorpio may find this a little bit more challenging. And Pisces, it's the square to Virgo, so that, the square to Gemini, so that might be 2. And our earth signs of Taurus and Capricorn might find this a little bit more challenging. Definitely Virgo, because that is the other square to Gemini. So overall, who is Venus? Venus is our planet of love. She's our principal archetype of forming bonds and connections and togetherness. So her primary principle is to bind, unify, and connect. So if you can imagine when you're baking and you've got your eggs and your flour and your sugar, and then you add your wet ingredients. It might be milk or eggs or oil, whatever you're making, but we add our wet ingredients to the dry, and that binds and connects and adds a moisture to create this beautiful batter. So symbolically, that is what Venus is. That's her job. And so she brings pleasure. She brings enjoyment. She brings us, the things that we love to do in our life. And so when we think about who Venus is in our own birth charts, what sign she's in, that can give us a little bit of insight or guidance into the things that we do for pleasure, the things that we enjoy, and the things that we generally like. And so I like to think of Venus a little bit as what do you like to do when the bills are paid and all the jobs are done? So that being said, Venus is a bit lazy. She's not Saturn. She's not the taskmaster that, makes everything, on budget and on time. She's not Mars, who's this active, competitive go-getter. So she's a little bit lazy. She wants to indulge. She wants the arts. She wants music. She wants a good time. She wants pleasure and drink and feasting and, all of those things. She wants the fun after the work is done, but she's not really there for the work. And so I think about anybody who may know I'm a fan of my medieval TV shows, and so they'll go out and they'll hunt and ravage and do the things that they do, and then afterwards they feast. And so that's the pleasure, that's the celebration, and that's what Venus is all about. So for the next 4 months, she's going to be in the sign of Gemini, which is the home of Mercury. And so this is, Gemini and Mercury is all about communication. It's about our ideas. It's about data. It's about facts. It's about, talking, connecting through conversations. Gemini is logistical, it's details, it's information. And so when Venus is occupying the home of Mercury, she's looking to connect in mercurial ways. And so she might be less about pleasure and enjoyment and cuddles and fun and wine, but she might want to pick your brain, or she might want to ask you questions to connect with you in a way, in a conversational way. So she's a thinking kind of Venus. So we might have less fun and merriment, but we might have an increase of conversation, of asking questions, of showing curiosity, of calling up our friends on the phone or on a Zoom call or a Skype or what have you. She might see fun rather than dancing and drinking. She might want to have a board game or a puzzle or do quizzes with you and ask you questions about, the things that you think about. And that's how she's going to get to know you and connect with you. And so in Gemini, Venus wants to connect with you through understanding how your mind works and how you think. So this can sometimes be a little bit flirty. It's, a little bit cheeky, it's light, it's fun, it can kind of spark a curiosity. It's like, oh, is that person interested in me? They're asking me all these questions, that type of thing. And so Venus in Gemini at her best, she's like a social butterfly. She is the person that bounces around in the party and connects with everyone and chats with everybody. And like that butterfly that goes from flower to flower and cross-pollinates, that's what Venus in Gemini does too. So this is great for sharing ideas, sharing information, sharing facts, sharing data. Can also be great for sharing gossip, can be great for sharing things that shouldn't be shared. Venus is, in Gemini, that's each sort of planetary and sign archetype do have their positive and negatives as well. So Venus has gone from the sign of Taurus, where she's super, super comfortable. It's her home sign, as she is in Pisces and in Libra. And now she's in Gemini. So she actually has had, in terms of what we call essential dignity, like a comfort drop. She's not in her best place in Gemini. That's not like a mental, also not a moral judgment. It's just that in Mercury's home, she has a little bit more trouble connecting. It's not natural for her to do the things that she needs to do while she's in Gemini. But what she can do, she'll engage with you at a mental level, a cerebral level, as opposed to sort of showing you a good time. She'll want to know how you really think. So the next 4 months, this can be ideal if you've got like a writing or study project to catch up on. Maybe if you're in a position where you've got extra time on your hands, catch up on writing or an assignment or some courses that you may have registered for and you've not completed. Maybe your curiosity for learning new things will peak. There might be a webinar or a course or a lecture online that you're like, I'm going to do that, and you sign up for it. You might catch up on some maybe podcasts or YouTube channels, all those saved files that sometimes we can have on different social media platforms. Reading is a great thing to do. Many people read for pleasure, very Venus in Gemini. And you might find that during this phase, you too might read for pleasure. Rather than reading material of a subject matter that you kind of have to or usually do, you might escape into some fiction novels or trashy magazines or trashy websites, whatever it is, as long as it's different to what you normally do, you might find something that's a little bit, piques your curiosity. And generally we're talking Venus and Gemini, it's light, it's entertaining, it's, it's sort of on the surface. And I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way. It's just, she's a social butterfly. She's buzzing around. So you might find that you become more curious about those lighter topics of life. It's more about variety, as opposed to going in deep into one thing. So you might use this period to be like, oh yeah, I really want to explore something or learn something. I'm not really sure what it is yet, so I'm going to use this Venus retrograde phase in Gemini to try a few things and figure it out. And so we've got a bit of an idea about who Venus is in Gemini. So let's explore now how the phases she's going to go through over the upcoming weeks and months also kind of adds a level of nuance to the entire cycle. And so we call this in astrology the synodic cycles. And so this adds a level of interpretation that we get from the visibility or lack thereof of a planet. And so the sun and Venus in the sky, relatively speaking, are quite close to each other. And so she will have a certain range of motion from the sun, and the level of closeness or separateness will determine her level of visibility. So this can tell us a lot of things about an individual, about a couple, about various situations. But what is interesting about this particular cycle, which is normal for Venus because she's very repetitive in the way that she operates. But this particular cycle is very reminiscent of mid-year of 2012. So Venus has 8-year retrograde phases where she will repeat her retrograde phase almost to the degree every 8 years. So the mid-year retrograde of Venus in Gemini, the last one was 2012. So what you can expect is a repetition of theme. So it might be a house topic ruled by Gemini. It might be a personal planet or an angle that's going to be activated by this. So cast your mind back to mid-year of 2012 and think about that period. Was it positive and fun and light, or did it, bring other chaos to your life? And so there may be some overlap here. Obviously, your own individual and personal cycles are very different 8 years later, as is the sky itself. So it's not going to be exactly the same. And there's a few very specific nuanced differences in this particular cycle, and that's the nodal position, but that's another topic for another time. So that being said, so the synodic cycle is a bit like a yo-yo. So imagine the sun is your hand and you've got a yo-yo in your hand, and you let that yo-yo go, and it can only go so far. And so that's like Venus. She can only get so far from the sun, and that distance is 47 degrees. So she has a regular cycle with the sun, and you'll notice in a birth chart that Venus can't be on the other side of the chart from the sun. She can only be in the same sign as, usually either adjacent signs. So you've got the sun in Gemini, Venus is generally going to be in Cancer or in Taurus. Occasionally it might be in Leo, occasionally it might be in Aries, but that would depend on the position of the sun. But the rule of thumb is she can never be any more than 47 degrees away. And so what happens is that the Venus gets to the end of the rope of the yo-yo, and then it's like, oh, I'm as far as I can go, and now I need to sort of slow ride down, I need to stop, and then start sort of making my way back. And so that process, the 47 degrees, is what we call maximum elongation. And so when Venus got to that maximum elongation point, that perfected on, in Australia, it was like March 24. And I think that was pretty much everywhere in the world at that time, where Venus symbolically got to the end of the line. And so when I cast my mind back to that time, this was when we saw a literal turnaround, which is what Venus is starting to do. She's slowing right down. And here in Australia, at least, we started to see a lot of slowing down or starting to see a change in direction of Venusian topics. Some of those were hairdressers got shut down, nail salons, bars, restaurants, cafes. We couldn't go out and socialize and mingle with people anymore. So we had that kind of shutdown of Venusian topics, of fun, and the way that we do things for pleasure and enjoyment. And so because we saw this, we can start to see, okay, now we can assume that this is going to be what this cycle is going to be about, at least on the collective level. And so, yeah, that's what we saw. Venus slowed down, And then what is happening at present is as Venus gets very, very slow, the sun starts to catch up to her. And so usually Venus is just a little bit faster than the sun. But now as Venus is going super slow in the sky, then the sun gradually starts to catch up to her. So that 47-degree variance begins to shorten. And there's different parts of the cycle that will change that level of visibility. And so, so she'll eventually slow down so much that she will retrograde, okay? And that happens on at the 21-degree mark of Gemini. And so that will see like Venusian matters again go in a different direction. And that's generally not a fun time. It's intense, it's heavy, it's slow, it's stuck. And it can feel a little bit, just generally uncomfortable, and particularly because Venus is comfort driven. And so what we can see there is something unpredictable happens. There's a change in direction, there's a change in energy, like a planet's going in one direction. It changes, and that will bring a change or a suddenness or an about turn or 180 around topics of whatever that planet signifies. And so, and then what happens is that the sun will Venus will start to come back and get closer and closer to the sun. And so once she gets to that 15-degree point, that is when we start to see what we call under the rays. So sometimes we see it under the beams, sometimes under the rays. And that will see Venus start to increase her discomfort. She starts to become really compromised. She's starting to get a little bit burned up by the sun, and she is increasingly invisible. And so this will really kind of peak around May 24, 25. So what we can see is that Venusian matters like women's issues, arts, the entertainment, the topics to do with gossip and scandal will become, there's this amplification of visibility. Things can be more locked down or driven down or hidden. So this is, as you can imagine, it's not ideal for Venusian things unless the intention is to have them hidden. And sometimes, using these cycles can be good. So maybe you have a project that you want to be under wraps and it's top secret. You can't let anybody know about it until it's finished or complete. It's like sometimes it can be about keeping your energy close. It can be, sometimes people want to make a move in a romantic situation and not allow other people to know about it. Whether somebody wants to leave their partner or they're having an affair, there might be that level of hiddenness there. And so there is that amplification of Venus being hidden. And so as she's going into this position of being hidden, so that under the rays or under the beams is when she's within 15 degrees of the sun. And then when she gets to 8 degrees, this is what we call combustion. And that's a place that is comfortable for no planet, because you're literally kind of consumed by the sun's rays and deemed powerless, if you like. And so that's when Venus goes under the horizon and we no longer see her. So she's technically gone. And she's going on her own sort of symbolic underworld journey. And so so she goes through this process, and then she'll eventually close that, the sun closes in on Venus, and that gap gets closed. And then on once they hit that 13-degree of Gemini mark, so that's around the 3rd and 4th of June, what we get there is the inferior conjunction. So the sun and Venus fuse, they're together. And this can be very empowering. It can be very rejuvenating, very purifying. it can be hard. It's not like a happy feeling, but there's this sense within that something's turned around. It might be those internal desires, you know, what do I want? What am I feeling about a certain situation? What is, you know, because Venus retrograding is an internalization of relationship matters, relational matters. It might be to do with love and money, particularly with Mercury's influence. What are my aesthetics? What do I desire? What pleases me? How am I compromising my needs to accommodate other people? You know, this is all Venus retrograde things. In the sign of Gemini is a big clue here. It's around conversation and connection. So the conjunction, the inferior conjunction rather, is it can be hard, can bring a clarity, but it's almost like this internal awareness of the direction I now need to move into with something, but not fully having enough light or enough gusto or whatever to make a move. So for example, it's like you've been sick for a while, and that's kind of what a planet stationing retrograde can symbolize, is taking sick, changing direction. And then once that inferior conjunction happens, it's like, I'm not better yet, but I have a diagnosis and I have some medication. I'm going to rest a bit longer, take my medicine, and then I will eventually emerge a little bit more powerful. And so this is a key point in the retrograde cycle, that maybe the decision's been made, the internalizing processes have been done, and now it's, you know, how do I move forward or take action around whatever it is for you. And so even though Venus is still now in the combustion zone, as she starts to pull away from the sun, there's still that essence of gaining strength as opposed to losing it, as when she was in the other side of the combustion. So there's a little bit more of a vibrancy coming back, or an empowerment or refreshment, or I'm getting my mojo back, but I haven't got it like fully yet. And so we'll experience this around the 13th of June, where we'll start to get a little bit of a feeling of clarity. And once she starts to emerge from that under the beams, the combustion and the beams, she will then pop up as a morning star, and she will be, rather than the damsel in distress going into the retrograde phase, she's emerging out of it, and as a renewed warrior princess, if you like. And then we get to the direct station, which happens at 5 degrees. And so that 5 degrees of Gemini, and that will happen on June 19, and she will stay there at that 5 degree place until she gets her full mojo, her full kit, her full armor, all the things, and she will station direct on June 25, 26. And so that is, you know, officially ends the retrograde cycle, and the worst is sort of over. Like there's this feeling of stillness before she's fully back out and fully emerged from the rays, if you like. And so she will then continue on in the sign of Gemini, and then on the 29th of July, she will then pass back over 21 degrees of Gemini, which is where she originally stationed retrograde at. And then all the shadow of the degrees is done. All the phases of the synodic cycle in terms of her invisibility is done for the time being, and she will continue through it in Gemini for another week or so until she moves into Cancer on August 7th. So there is a lot more to the cycle than just all of a sudden she's moving forward and then she's moving backwards. So those dates where she starts to change her levels of visibility, they're very, put those in the diary. This is when we're going to start to either feel like something's hidden, and this might be working through personal stuff. It's not necessary to say, it doesn't necessarily mean that things are being hidden from you. It often means what's hidden within ourselves, particularly in Gemini. What have we not given voice to? What have we not spoken up about? What have we not empowered ourselves with from asking the questions? And so that might be something that's very important to do as Venus starts to lose light and go under the beams around the 24th, 25th of May. And so this will be the time where we take the data, we take the information, we take the conversations, we internalize them, we process them, we come up with some kind of solution around when she hits that conjunction with the sun at 13 degrees of Gemini, and then she can start to emerge from that after that June 13 date. So there we go. That's a lot to think about. And this is a long process. I mean, it's only the start of April now, and we are moving through this for the next 4 months. So I'd love to hear your comments about what you anticipate with Venus retrograde in Gemini, perhaps what you experienced in 2012, and what you're most looking forward to perhaps learning more about or discovering more as Venus goes through one of the most curious and inquisitive signs out of all of the 12. So I look forward to hearing all of those comments, and I look forward to catching you very soon in another video.